Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Ribbert and this is one of my builds. It's the sixth build in this city. It's a rustic waterfront, but I'm starting off by showing off some things I did in between episodes. Um, I built, I kind of just filled out the map a bit over here and gave it some interesting parts, I guess. A little pond, those kind of JPN walls. I did a whole bunch of more trees and I filled out these water lines with some new plants that I got. And over here, this part I also filled out. And some of it I built before in between other episodes. And I thought I'd just show it off to maybe give you a bit of a feel for what the city is up to. This is gonna be the last video in this city, in this region even, because I'm gonna start a new region. Um, I there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to start a new region. For one, I learned a lot during the building of this region that yeah, that in the end um, most of the cities are of a very different standard of design than this city, for instance. And I kind of just want to start fresh and see how the new ideas and the new techniques that I have uh, will help me design a new region and maybe even find some new ideas. And I thought another reason is that I thought it would be nice to just show how I start a new region and to let you all in on the process of me starting a region and at some point even finishing that region to a better extent that I finished this one because there's a whole lot of things that I kind of had in mind that I wanted to do in this region, but it's just so much work. So for the next region, I picked or made actually, because I didn't just pick a region, I actually made it myself, and I intentionally made it quite small. So if there's like people that want to use the same region, it's on the I'm gonna link it in the first video on the Simtropolis website. I uploaded it. So if you feel like just playing along, I guess, um, you can just download the region and yeah, just see what you make of the things and maybe share your ideas somewhere in the descriptions or whatever. Not in the comments, I guess. Here I'm just trying out some of those JPM walls. They can look very good, but the terrain, the diagonals of the terrain are not always consistent, and they are more consistent, or actually, they're a lot. They're just consistent when you have a height difference that results in cliffs. But yeah, I didn't have that height difference, so at certain angles they behave a little bit different, which makes those wall bits look very weird. So I decided not to use them and to just decorate the walls with some trees and some plants, which you'll see later. What I'm doing here is I had the idea to make a neighborhood that consisted of a couple of plateaus, and I thought it might look nice to see the height gradually, but also not very gradually, I guess, because it's pretty abrupt, the difference between plateaus. Yeah, I just wanted to see how that would work, and I thought, um, well, the reason why I wanted to make the neighborhoods flat is because I like the backyards and stuff more when they are zoned on flat areas. So that's why I wanted it flat, and I wanted to do plateaus because I thought it might look interesting. I do think it will look interesting to some degree in the end. Maybe not as interesting as I had thought. I think if I had used a steeper gradient or maybe less height levels and used the gradient that I had spread over the fewer height levels, it might have looked a bit more epic, I guess. But I think it looks very nice in the end. And the main goal for this neighborhood was to extend the rustic kind of atmosphere that I had in the other part of the city. And I do think that I achieved that goal very well. So this is just me building a very quaint neighborhood. And yeah, I'm kind of showing off a lot of flattening of the land. But it's not just flattening of the land. It's also the decisions that I make, the kind of shapes that I'm looking for. And yeah, just the little ideas that pop into your head when you're just doing something that is actually kind of boring, I guess. Putting down so many of those single bits of roads, but that gives your mind the time to think of new ideas, and so it's not always a bad idea to do some boring stuff in a game like this, because it might help you take the time to get some creative ideas along the way. So, that wasn't really the reason why I did it. It was just a side effect, but I think in the future I might do that a little bit more. But I might also do this stuff off cam a bit more, or maybe do a montage of things. Although I do think making a montage would be a lot more work, and I don't, I'm not really lazy or anything, but yeah, editing these videos and doing the recording already is a decent task, and I do want to keep it fun for myself. So maybe, well, I think I'll do some montages and see how it goes. Maybe I'll find a very nice workflow that just, uh, or find some techniques. I guess I'll just look on the internet for maybe some tricks people might have. Um, yeah, so here I'm just figuring out ideas of how I want these roads to look. I don't need them all to be super smooth, but the one near the coast I did want to have a very smooth, and yeah, the ones near the cliffs I could have used some extra spacing, so I could have made them smooth as well. But if I wanted to make some of those bends very smooth, I would have needed to put a street bit on a location that would have derped out the height of either the higher part or the lower part. So yeah, if you're looking to do a build similar to this, then you should probably keep a double spacing in between your roads or in between your heights. But then, hmm, if you wanted to use um, those wall bits of the JPN set, then you'd need to do some pretty steep. Well, I think that might look kind of interesting actually. So basically you would do this on the side of a mountain, I guess, and then you would just make sure that everything turns into a cliff, so the diagonals don't derp out as much as they did over here. Well, derp out, it's just that some of them go one direction across, and some of them go the other direction, and I think it has to do with the orientation of it, because it does seem to be very consistent along a certain orientation, and then the other orientation doesn't derp out as much. So it does have to do with the orientation of the roads, or not the roads. I'm talking about um, the land tiles, I guess, and the slope of the land tile. Yeah, so here I'm designing the roads a little bit, I guess I've been doing that for a while now, so it's a bit weird that I only mention it now, but um, yeah, when I'm designing these roads, um, I didn't intend to design the perfect road layout. I just wanted something that looks interesting, so with a couple of aspects that might look weird or just, yeah, I don't know. I'm not looking to make it weird, but I'm looking to make some interesting areas where different types of buildings would spawn, so you get a little bit of a variety across your neighborhood. And yeah, here I'm just figuring out how I'm gonna connect all these areas because there were a bunch of different height levels, and I didn't want them to connect with a very steep road or anything, so I had to figure out what would be good locations for them to connect up. And yeah, I don't know, I kind of like this build. I actually do very much like the end result of it, and I also like the process of getting there. But there's also some things that I would have liked to have been a little bit. Well, it's just, I don't know. You make something that you like, but you still find things that you would have done different in the future, and I think that's just how you learn. Um, yeah, I think that's just the process of learning how to do creative stuff. I don't know. Yeah, so this is a bit of a shore area, and part of the idea why I did the plateaus was to give each plateau a little bit of a sea view. So if you lived all the way up on the top plateau, you would still be able to look out of your window or sit in your front yard or backyard. I guess it depends on the way your whole house is oriented, I think. But it depends on that, I guess. Whether your front or backyard is facing towards the sea. But I don't know. I wanted to give them all the opportunity to just enjoy the sea and the view, I guess. So that's why I'm keeping it all low density. Also because I think the low density houses look very nice in this architecture set. So yeah, that's a bit of the decision making that I did. Here I just wanted to fill the roundabout. Couldn't really find a nice reward, so I thought let's just do a flower garden. Um, yeah, yeah, I'm just designing some more of the roads. And when I'm designing these roads, I do keep in mind that I want to have the intersections not too close together. That's more of a thing that I learned from City Skylines. But with the network add-on mod, it also helps to keep uh, the intersections far apart because they do get a negative bonus if they're too close together. And there I just showed a before and after shot. I didn't really do much there, but in between the before and after shot, I tried a bunch of different ways to create a viaduct, a bridge, I guess. Um, but I don't think the bridge or viaduct things are actually possible with the network widening mod roads. So yeah, it ended up not working out. Then I tried to do something with maybe flexible underpasses, and that could have worked, but it looked a bit weird. So I thought the big intersection also looks a bit out of place, I guess, but I just kept it like that. And here I'm looking to do an S-bend with streets, and I think I don't know, for some reason I seem to remember that there is an S-band for streets, and I saw somebody build it, but it might have been for roads, and I might have just mixed up uh, that it was for roads instead of streets. And here I'm trying to make this a bit smooth, and I ended up deciding that I needed to do one S bend kind of thing less. So this is also an S bend, I guess, but it's not the kind of S bend that I was thinking of. I want to do one a little bit tighter. This one takes up 3 spaces, I believe, or even 4. And I wanted to do one that shifts over 1 space. But yeah. So here I just assigned some of this street, and I decided that I didn't want that little zigzag bit, that very sharp zigzag over there. So I decided to realign them. And then I started to build it one too far over, so I bulldozed it and made it a little bit smoother over there in that corner. And I think the smoothness really helped the shoreline come together. Because later on I'm gonna do a bunch of plant stuff over there and some some more decoration. And I think the smoothness of that street really helped it come along. So I'm using some roundabouts, and I will admit that a lot of these roundabouts um, don't really make sense because there's two roads going into them. The idea at first was to make them endpoints, but then I decided to do the roads in a more circular design, going around the neighborhoods, and yeah, I just kept the roundabouts because I thought uh, it would be a convenient spot for people to turn if they by accident went into the wrong direction, and then they could just turn without having to go into somebody's driveway and turning around. So I thought they made some sense, and a whole bunch of them do connect up to three roads or streets. So a whole bunch of them do make sense from a traffic management perspective. Um, yeah, I built. I'm sorry if I already showed me building the school, but the idea behind putting the school a bit farther down was because the landfill is over there, and I didn't want people. Well, I didn't want to zone residential near the landfill. I end up doing it a bit too close to the landfill, anyways. But I did have in mind that I wanted to think about the negative desirability aspect of the landfill and how that would limit the growth of residential near it. So I decided to just use the bottom part for residential, and I'm gonna use the top part for commercial, which also makes sense because there's a lot more cars driving in the general top area in that vicinity. So yeah, that means more customers for the shops, I guess. I think that's how the game works. That if you have more cars, yeah, the game uses car noise, which isn't something that you can see on an overlay or anything, but it is something that exists in the game, the traffic noise metric, and it's also produced by metros, I think, or maybe just pedestrians even. I'm not sure actually what all the aspects of traffic noise are, but the general idea of it is that if you have a bunch of traffic noise somewhere, it uses that number to indicate the amount of customers a commercial area would have. So if you just put commercial near a bunch of noisy highways, that helps them actually develop into yeah, profitable commercial areas. And I'm not sure whether the offices also, I think to some extent the offices also use the metric of traffic noise in order to decide how successful they are. So it helps to plan your commercial areas near dense roads. But yeah, it's a bit of a, in general, if you design cities very segmented, I think this city was pretty segmented in its design. You just create a lot more commute time, and that commute time results in more cars on the roads, which does help your commercial to thrive and to be successful because there's more car noise for them to profit off. But yeah, in my perspective, it also leads to a less healthy city in terms of a place where you would want to live or not. Here I'm just trying out some swimming pools because I thought, yeah, maybe it doesn't make too much sense to have a swimming pool near the sea, but to some extent it might. And the homes that do pop up here, they they can look a bit like holiday villas or holiday homes if you use your imagination. So you could make a story about it being a pool near a bunch of holiday places where people can just hang out at the pool if they don't feel like going into the sea, or if there's like a harsh wind and the waves are just too rough to go swimming, or whatever reason you would have to not want to go into the sea. And here I wanted to do a little bit of a landmark in this little area because I thought it might look interesting, but the 3x3s dirt out the terrain, so I found this nice little. It's a bit of a Renaissance building, and I thought that might look pretty interesting in there with a bunch of flora around it, just to give something to the neighborhood without it standing out too much. Because I do think it fits in with the general feel of the neighborhood in terms of the buildings that will pop up later. And I did have that in mind. And you don't have to have a very monotone neighborhood. Maybe this neighborhood is kind of monotone, but I think I do get a nice mix of different buildings in there. And I do think it looks kind of realistic to some extent, though in real life most neighborhoods are planned by a committee and a bunch of architects and some city planners, and they all design on some style of housings that, at least in the Netherlands, that's the way it works. There's a city committee that hires some architects to make some designs, or maybe they just hire a big firm that builds these houses and they have some designs from architects that already might already be part of the firm, and that way they just come up with a big plan for a neighborhood like this. So it's, to some extent, I do think I did simulate that a little bit in this neighborhood, because a lot of the houses are actually of a very similar design in the end, and some of them are a bit different, but you do have that in those neighborhoods as well, because they tend to have a bunch of lots or a bunch of building spaces where people can just submit their own design and request that they can build their own design there. And there's some approval stuff going on, at least in the Netherlands, to make the own designs not too weird or too ugly, or, well, there's a process to it. And I know these things because I did study civil engineering for a bunch of years. Yeah, so I do have a bit of a background in building design and the process of designing buildings and requesting the design that you made at, well, not really requesting, but having it reviewed by a city committee and how long. Yeah, it it can take like a half a year when you have a design before it gets approved. But sometimes it's really fast. It really depends on how yeah, how big the building is, I guess, and how busy the times are, and what city you're in. Some cities are more busy than others, I guess, in that respect. So here I'm designing the coastline. Um, I'm halfway done, I guess, with designing the coastline, and I do like the paths that I make in terms of their look, but you could have some comments about that they're way too wide to be realistic, and they would have looked a bit cuter if they were a bunch smaller. And I would have to agree. Um, I didn't really make come to that conclusion until I was pretty far in the build, and I don't know. The next time I'll make them a little bit smaller, a bunch narrower, and a bunch more realistic. But for now, I do think they still give a nice effect to this beach, and they give it a little bit of realism to both the beach and the neighborhood. And I do think the idea was very nice with the rocks. Well, at first I started with some other rocks, and they looked a bit too solid. Then I started to look whether maybe I could use the the trees that I had to make something. And well, I could have looked for some mods, pause the recording and look for some mods. But in general, I just um, use the tools that I have when I do a recording. So yeah, and I think that's a good way to do it because being limited by the things that you have right now makes for some interesting decisions as well. And it might force you to think about different solutions to problems because you can't just go on the internet and find the best solution. That doesn't mean that the solution you found wasn't good. You don't have to have everything the best. If it's if it looks nice to you, then it's good enough, I think. And this result looks pretty nice to me. Although next time I would have used the smaller rocks maybe, or maybe found some other rocks. I've also thought about maybe finding um, some sort of planks to make a path out of a bunch of planks being next to each other. I think that would also give a nice texture if there's even such a mod out there. Um, yeah, so this is the method that I used to decorate in between the areas and at some empty spots in the areas. I first went around using it was a brush that was called bushes, some sort of bushes, slope bushes, I believe, and I just plopped some trees down. Well, I didn't intend for there to be too many trees, and I think the amount of trees is actually quite nice. They're pretty well spaced out, and then I just went around it, filling it up with a bunch of lower flora in order to make the ground underneath the trees a bit less empty. And here I zoned some 3 deep zonings, and that's a different zoning type from what I used in other parts so far. And the reason for that, well, I didn't really have a good reason for it, except that the area didn't really allow for a good way to fill it with the 2x1s or 1x2s and 1x1s without putting a bunch of extra roads there. But in the end, um, it ended up giving a nice variation in the architecture of the neighborhood by giving it some more fancy homes over there that just give a nice variation to the general look of the of the build that I'm doing. So mixing up the zone sizes, um, it it can be nice, but you don't want to do it too much because you do want to, at least in my philosophy, you do want to keep a certain, um, I don't know, maybe a certain feel to a neighborhood, or maybe certain style, I guess. I think the word is style. I don't know why I had trouble finding that word, but you do want to have a certain style to a neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that the entire neighborhood has to use the same exact style. Because in real life, a neighborhood doesn't have just one type of building. They have, well, it depends on the kind of neighborhood, but the ones that I'm used to have a lot of similar buildings, and then at some points in between, there's a couple of different buildings that were designed by people who just hired an architect and had a lot of money to fund their own building process. And I think um, that both encourages a neighborhood to have a good mixture of wealthy and less wealthy people, which, um, well, I think it's good both for the wealthy and the less wealthy people if they are not isolated from each other. Though you do want to have that with limits, I guess, because at some point it's just gonna, in real life at least, it's gonna impact the land value or the house prices. Oh yeah, over here I was derping out with that roundabout, and it turned out that the texture set of this street add-on mod is, I don't know if you could call it missing, but it just doesn't have the texture for a diagonal going into a roundabout. And you could call that missing, but I don't know. There's so many textures that you'd have to account for when doing a street add-on mod texture set, so I don't want to call it missing. I just want to call it that it doesn't have it. And yeah, I think the amount of work that already went into all this from the NAM team is, I think we can only be thankful for the time that it took. And I hope they feel happy about the appreciation that I got from it. And well, the beauty of the work that they did. And I think it's very nice that we um, have and also used to have, but we definitely still have a very nice modern community in SimCity. There's still a lot of people around that yeah, use their creativity in a very interesting way to, well, interesting, uh, in a very powerful way, I would say, to help other people use their creativity to make interesting cities. So yeah, I do wanna say that I appreciate the whole team of the network add-on mod, and any other modders that maybe aren't around or that are still around. It doesn't really matter really, they stir around. I just appreciate them a whole lot. And I hope me showing off their creations, um, I don't know if they ever even hear about this video or whatever, but I hope that if somebody does hear about the video, that yeah, they can be a little proud of the things that they made with their own free time, and that they can see me derping around or just making a little bit of a cute little neighborhood like this, and they, yeah, I don't know. I think if I were to have made a mod like that, I would be very happy if it, if I found a video making a little build about it or showing off some of the things that you made along the years. Um, yeah, so I'm using the same technique to fill in these. I wanted to use a very similar style across the neighborhood, And in order to achieve that, I just used the same order of placing things down. Um, so I did the trees, and then one specific foliage, then the next one, and I basically went from big to small. So I used the trees to just roughly fill in the area. Well, it's not really the trees because, as you could see there, that's the real trees. But I used the bigger bushes first, um, then some medium-sized, what were they called? Feather plants, I think. I used some medium-sized feather plants, which were pretty small, so I don't know if they're medium-sized. And then after that, I used cattails, which had a very small bounding box, I guess you would name that. So they fit into the smallest little nooks and crannies. And that way I got a pretty nice fill on the area. I guess there's always some, yeah, I don't know. Maybe the grass texture still makes it look a bit empty at some places. At some point in that neighborhood, you could see me put down some of the grassy park areas, and to a big degree, that was just for the functional part that they play in beautifying and raising the land value. But I do think that they look very nice. So if they don't derp out the slopes, I think I would use them. I don't know if they derp out the slopes. I have to test that. But it was pretty late already when I found that out, and I didn't want to redo all the trees. So I decided to just go on with what I had for now. And yeah, this is basically what I built. And I'm just staring at this, hoping that it all grows. And yeah, a bunch of it grows. And I cut some footage out where I fixed the power a little bit. I had a bunch of power plants that were super old. So I bulldozed them. Well, power plants, windmills. And in the top middle of the screen, you can see a new little. Well, you could see if you were really fast. I guess you'd have to go back if you want to see it. Well, it will show up later, I think. But I made a bit of a windmill field over there. Um, yeah, there's that one big low density lot that I'm resizing every once in a while, and I installed a bunch of um, gas stations, and I wanted one of them to grow there. And I did look up the size, but I didn't install all of them because I installed like three or four, maybe five of them. I guess I'll link them in the description because I do think they look nice, even though they didn't pop up. And that is because this city is not very new, and this whole region is very not new. And um, the lots were uh, they were determined to be of growth stage 1. A little bit about growth stages. As your city grows or as your region grows, um, it changes the amount of. Well, let's start at the start. For each type of building, zonable building, I mean, there's a bunch of different growth stages. I don't know the exact numbers, you can look a lot of that stuff up. But as you have more capacity for residential, for instance, it changes the uh, what would you call that? It changes the percentages of the different growth stages that will spawn in your cities. And since this region has like 2 million residential people and probably like two two and a bit residential, because it doesn't look just at the people, it actually looks at the capacity of your buildings. So in terms of capacity, I have even more than 2 million, and that causes the growth stages to be pretty advanced, which means that once your city actually has a bunch of um, lots that can already be growth stage 1, which I do have in this city, then it stops growth stage 1 from spawning at all until you have until you have the percentages that allow for it. Um, I'm sorry if this is not clear. I might do a bit of a guide on that sometimes. It's a bit tricky. There's some things that you can read. Maybe I'll write a guide on it and just link that in the description. Not in this video's description, but at some point in the future uh, I'll just write a script maybe and do a bit of a video about growth stages. But the general idea is that once you have a big city and a city with, yeah, just a big city that is already full with a bunch of growth stage 1 stuff. And at this point, I think only like 2% of all the buildings can be growth stage 1, and else they just get replaced by higher growth stages. So that causes, or that caused uh, the the gas station to not pop up, which is kind of sad. Maybe I should have gotten a gas station that I could just put down myself, but I kind of like it when things are growable. So next region I will be able to put some gas stations down early on, make them historical, and just keep them around to make the city a bit realistic. Yeah, so here's some closing shots of the video. Um, I hope you liked the build that I did. If you have some ideas of interesting mods that I could use, feel free to comment them in the in the comments. And yeah, maybe you have some techniques or ideas of things that I could have done a little bit different. Don't be too critical because I am a bit of a sensitive person like everyone is. Yeah, so here's a bit of an overview of the entire city. As you can see, there's a pretty big difference to some parts of the cities in terms of style and detailing, which is also why I just wanted to start fresh, so I can just keep building, because I do like to build, and I always have a bit of a thing against bulldozing a lot of stuff. So I do want to keep building, and I just want to start fresh and maybe show you some tips and tricks that I have for when you're starting a new city and you're very short on money or whatever. And here's some nice little calm shots of the neighborhood. There's some pretty dirty buildings over there that for some reason got abandoned and then filled by a lower tier of people. Well, lower tier, I don't know, lower wealth class, I guess. But this is the general look of the neighborhood that I was looking to get, with the nice little uh, red roofed houses. And for me, this looks very homely for a couple of reasons. Because, well, the main reason is those buildings or similar styled buildings are very common in the Netherlands and in areas where I've lived. So that's why I really like this neighborhood. I hope you enjoyed the video. I want to thank you for sticking around, and yeah, hope to see you again. Goodbye.